Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Logistics Executive TV. I'm delighted today to be able to finally get onto the show, to the podcast. One of the great storytellers that I've been following for many years. Talks a lot about business, talks a lot about leadership, but is in particular a specialist on sport, global sport activity, but residing in Australia. And without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Patrick Skene. Patrick, thanks so much for joining us in the late afternoon, I think, in Sydney, yeah?
Yes, greetings, Kim, and hello to the logistics world.
Fantastic. Thanks, Patrick. So, LinkedIn Chief Creative Officer, storyteller, in italics, author, curious optimist, wordsmith, multicultural marketeer, and someone who delves into the meaning of sport. It's a hell of a breadth of a background. Maybe you can give us a bit of a heads up on your story from the beginnings, a little bit of a background on Patrick Skene.
Yeah, Scots-Irish background, so I'm basically half Irish, a quarter English and a quarter Scottish, so I have that UK diversity. And I found that the Irish side has shaped me very much. I come from storytelling country, the place called Ballyshannon, where my grandmother's from in Ireland, and that is the oldest village in Ireland, and that has the folk festival every year and is very much heavily old school Irish culture. And I remember going to pubs and hearing storytellers, and the Irish, much like indigenous nations, really treasure stories as the keeper of culture and are truly important, particularly the Irish, who had the English banned them from speaking their native tongue for 500 years. So they have a role in society called the Shawnee. And he would wander from town to town and get fed by the town and tell the kids the stories, and he'd disappear before the English could come and catch him. And that's how the stories were kept alive. And I think we've become a little bit blasé to storytelling, but I love it in every shape or form. I'm seeing it emerge in business as an important skill set for CEOs. And sport is perhaps the ultimate. The two pillars I have are sport and multicultural. And the stories that come out of both of those, I do multicultural marketing for my own agency called Cultural Pulse. So 57% of Australia now has one or more parent born overseas, and you just can't reach them by putting an ad in the newspaper now. You've got to get out and engage. So we do big events. The FIFA Women's World Cup is our most recent big event. We did all the fan engagement for that, and that was wildly, wildly successful. They've never seen an event like it. There were 31 sellouts. Can you believe women's sport? 31 sellouts in matches not involving the Matildas. It just
unbelievable.
It was just like the birth of the real revolution. And now, interestingly, the Matildas is the female Australian soccer / football team is the biggest sporting brand in Australia now.
It is.
Whilst we like to talk about how far we have to go, that is, for me, an extraordinary piece of progress for the Matildas to have broken into the mainstream hearts and minds like that.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I guess time and place, as I say, you're an author. You talk a lot online about, I don't know how big your following is online, but it's got to be pretty big. Because whenever I see the stories that you're telling and the highlights of the various sporting activities that are taking place, and some of the people that are overcoming incredible odds to be successful in sport, and not just Australia, of course, but around the world. There's always this very poignant segue into other parts of our society that you're talking about. You're an author. I'm not too sure how many books you've written, but I've certainly read the one about Olsen Filipina, which was one of the most famous early indigenous, or certainly Polynesian rugby league players, before rugby league players were Polynesians.
Yes, and so he was my childhood hero, Olsen Filipina. The world of rugby league back in 1980 was monocultural, and he just appeared out of nowhere, playing with a smile. He was new. He had a name like we hadn't seen before. And I remember Olsen, he copped a lot to play the game he loved. He went through a lot of racism. He had teammates that tried to injure him. He went through, and he was, a classic shy Polynesian outside his own family structure. He was very shy and he didn't know who he could trust. And he went through a really hard time. And he often cops a negative legacy. But I always, when I saw him play, I thought he was a giant because he kept getting dropped. And the more I investigated, I found out that he had coaches that were either outright racist to him or would humiliate him. So you can't believe everything you see. And when you're judging pioneers, you have to go beyond the statistics. So I really dug into that story. And he, for me, is a giant of what we call the Pacific Revolution. 50% of the NRL rugby league is now of Pacific or Māori background, which for 3 or 4% of the population of Australia is, and they've culturally upended the game. It's Christianity's back. It's hip hop and R&B more than country music and rock, which it was when we grew up. And I just thought this fella deserves a story. It's not always about the guys that play 300 games. It's about the pioneers and the revolutionaries. So I went over to New Zealand and went up to his spiritual hometown of Kaikohe, which is a 90% Māori town. It's a Ngāpuhi stronghold, and learning about the Ngāpuhi, who stereotypically they're dismissed as cannibals and just with a whole bunch of stereotypes. They're actually a truly incredible people. They defeated the British. They got muskets and defeated the British. Sent them scurrying back to Auckland. There's 114 of them dead there in the graveyard up in Kaikohe. So they were the first Indigenous group that were able to parlay home ground advantage into a. There had been previous resistance movements against the British colonies, and most notably the Maroons in Jamaica had an uprising, but to actually beat in the British in pitched battle, that was a huge moment in British colonial history. And we see the fearsome Ngāpuhi channeling themselves into rugby union now. So I went up there with Olsen, immersed myself. Then I did 2 weeks, immersed myself in South Auckland to understand the Polynesian community, because it's all, South Auckland's the crucible and cradle of rugby league and rugby union and boxing, the revolution that's taken place, and learned so much. I learned nothing in school about the New Zealand. What an honor to learn about the Māori and the wider New Zealand people that I got to experience through that book. So a thoroughly enjoyable experience. My second book is the history of Chinese heritage Aussie rules. So much the same, Chinese Australia, 100,000 Chinese came to Australia in the 1800s around the gold rush.
Yeah, that's right.
Massive contributors to the building Australia of every level, and went through racist abuse and exclusion. Weirdly enough, more than 300 of them played Aussie rules. They didn't play any other sports, but for some reason, Aussie rules took them in, particularly in country towns where racism is stereotypically, they say it's more, but it's actually less. A lot more intermarriage, and people just get on with things out there. And if you pull your weight in a country town, it tends to transcend skin color, which I found fascinating. But that's a book because the Chinese population here, even 4th and 5th generation Chinese Australians, were copping abuse pretty bad during COVID. And a survey came out that said Chinese Australians have basically had a huge chunk of their sense of belonging to Australia taken away from them. Even 3rd or 4th generation, they were pushed back for being Chinese, and it was very upsetting for a lot of them to have their fellow country people turn on them. So I thought, why not explore this book? So it's a long story. I ended up finding about 25 Chinese Australians that played footy, Aussie rules, raised some funding from the government, spent a year writing it, and it's been incredibly warmly received. Chinese community love it. And it's just added a whole new chapter to Australian history and moved these guys from the margins to the centre. I've resurfaced them at the centre because Chinese Australians and a lot of other groups have been airbrushed out of the classic textbook Australian history. So it's good to be able to do my bit, because I don't think we really are a complete nation until we're the sum of all our stories, wherever you are. So that's that was my little bit there. And I just found that fascinating, how these guys were put on colours, cop abuse. They all kept their Chinese names for 3, 4, 5 generations. They chose not to anglicise their names. And that hidden Chinese history is truly fascinating to me. And I wrapped it all around sport, but it really is a book about Chinese Australian history through the lens of footy.
Geez, you raise a lot of hot points there that trigger me, actually, Patrick. When you flick back, just a couple of things there. Olsen, I happened to actually be in Australia in the 80s. having graduated from uni and nothing better to do than go over and play up in Australia. Ended up playing rugby, and I watched Olsen play rugby league when he was the only Polynesian rugby league player. It was incredible. Of course, he's a Kiwi, as you say, and unfortunate, tragic death, and it were taken way too early. And then you talk about back to our Indigenous people in Australia, the Maori, who have an incredible history, which most people won't be aware of listening to this show, is they were completely undefeated against the British colonials back in the days, back in the 1700s and 1800s, and the battles, the Maori Wars and the wars that took place against the colonials. They ended up making a treaty, which still exists today. Everybody had to put down their arms, and there's a lot of debate about how fair that treaty was, but they were never taken over by the British. So we're very proud of that in Australia, in New Zealand. And coming into the multicultural nature of sport and life, I guess, in Australia. I mean, you mentioned the Chinese, and I know a little bit about that, having studied the Chinese when I was playing rugby in America in the 80s, from the gold rush. And of course, the Chinese population moved around. They went down to the southern part of New Zealand for the gold rush, around Arrowtown and Queenstown, a fantastic history, and then into Australia as well. You post a lot. I mean, you're a creative. You've got your own brand agency, creative agency. You bring in multiculturalism in such an interesting way in a lot of what you do. What are some of the hot points that you see in terms of the segues between what you're doing in the creative world and especially around leadership and building brands and building pride with businesses versus sport in particular?
Well, if I often look at sport as the great communal bonfire, and we can all live in these subdivisions and be living in our groups, but we need the repeated interaction to make friends and to break us out of our cliques. We need repeated interactions. Now, there's not just sport that does that. You can get it through choirs. You actually get it through school and universities. They are repeated. But as far as the local communities, if you're not playing sport or you're not doing things to interact with other parts of the community, it's very difficult to build the social cohesion that we need to have a great community. So sport has this incredible role to play for multicultural people, and a lot of successful multicultural people you'll find engaged through sport. They either became a fan of a team and went out there and found a tribe and a group of people to sit with and felt inclusion. There's nothing worse than feeling excluded, because you can be marginalized, you can be alienated, you can be radicalized in the case of some communities if you're not connected into the larger organism. And sport is that the connection dynamic. And what sport, people talk about leadership all the time, but how do you practice leadership? You really do it either through all of your example as a walking citizen, but in a formal sense outside the business world, sport is really the only thing where you demonstrate leadership and you get pretty much complete allegiance and you stick to a plan and you get to build leadership. Funnily enough, I was speaking recently, refereeing is actually a great leadership builder as well, because you find your voice, you command with authority, you learn about personal space, and you can learn a lot of that physical leadership. And I'd never even thought of that, because it's such a universally damned role in society, so crucial, so important. And that's probably a third thing. I write for a group called Club Respect that sticks up for referees and does positive things for referees, because I just think it's the biggest blind spot in our society that a normally mild-mannered accountant will go down to the village square and scream at a 14-year-old kid about some meaningless sport. They're
also fairly well subjugated. They get bashed on every side, and it's a pretty tough gig to be a referee in any sport, and certainly respect to all of them.
Well, sport has all these leadership points. I coach my daughter in under sixes, and we all need to make ourselves coachable as well, because you get into a corporate environment, you'll find people that have been in the army or people that have been in sport can so easily adapt and be brought up into leadership structures, because you can't be a leader without being coachable yourself. or you're just a sort of autocrat dictator or a manipulator to be a proper leader. But what I find the best in sport is these amazing leaders. John Wooden in the States, Graham Lowe in rugby league, Alex Ferguson in football, and the rise of the man manager storyteller as a leader in sport, and they captivate their teams through stories and narratives, because every season of sport, it's the classic hero's journey. You all join your rafts together and go on a quest. And along that quest, unless you have a freakish season where you don't lose anything, and they're not fun seasons anyway, because the real leadership comes from the dark times. The real leadership comes when you've had 2 wins and 16 losses. Like, why does your team come together when you know you're going to be outgunned? Yep. Everyone's a hero and the champagne's popping when you're crushing some weaker opponent. But the leadership opportunities, sport, is not about the captain's armband as well. It's about, everyone has that unofficial leader who not probably good talking to the media, but they're actually the wolf pack leader in sport. You see it particularly in sports like rugby or NFL or rugby league or union, where you get these physical leaders of the pack that everyone gets inspired of when they move forward. Mm-hmm. So there's all these leadership opportunities within sport, and that's why you see a lot of sport leaders go into the public speaking circuit straight after to talk to corporates, because they've been in a pressure cooker situation. Look at Ange Postecoglou now. He's probably going to lose his job from being hailed. Yep. So it's so accountable in sport that the coach just simply gets sacked hard, whereas a lot of the corporate world, people will nurse leaders through, but it's so results driven that it provides corporate leaders with a bit more inspiration on the sort of life and death nature of other industries and how they cope with it, and how a lot of people talking about being in the present and just executing and maybe biting off less but doing it more well. And people have all of their different angles, because as leaders you're like a pollinating bee. You're sourcing information from as wide, and sport just gives us the pressure cooker situations that create leadership situations that people respect.
Yeah, I think there's a hell of a lot there that to really unwrap, because I guess I'm biased, being brought up in New Zealand where rugby was a religion and still is a religion to a certain extent. And since I started this business in 1999, moving from New Zealand into Australia, one of the very first things I did was said that as we build the recruitment and consulting side of the business, we're only going to hire people that have played a team sport. And some of the early business partners who moved on over time couldn't quite figure it out. One of them was a Kiwi, he got it. And to me, it was all about, you need to learn how to fail. You need to learn how to fall. You need to learn how to lose. You need to learn how to take the knocks, to get beaten, to get bashed. And through that, you learn how to appreciate your victories, as seldom as they may come in the early days of starting a new business. And to me, I've always leaned into the great stories of men and women from various parts of the world that have been through sporting excellence and hardships in the same way, to be able to learn the lessons and give you resilience. Everybody talks about resilience these days, especially in logistics and supply chain. What does it really mean? It means knowing how to get pushed back and pushed down and picked back up again.
I think it also takes you out of the instant gratification cycle. I just can't conjure a championship for Arsenal now. No matter how much I want to, I can't conjure it. I have to wait. And it's going to make it sweeter. We're in a world of instant gratification and dopamine hits galore. And it just teaches. That's why I keep saying to people, read books, do it for your brain, stretch something out, make something delicious and long. Don't have everything on the goldfish 9-second lap of the bowl mentality. But I say almost identical things to my people, that if you haven't played team sport or put yourself in an environment where you can lose, you don't have it in the muscle memory for the inevitable losses you start taking in the corporate world. And the problem is, if you haven't taken L's, because taking an L in sport, just say you do a bad back pass in soccer and it gets intercepted and you lose 1-0 against the arch rival team, and your coach says, "I told you not to do that." you're going down to reserves. And, you'll go through the full 7 stages of grief, denial at first, how dare he? And then, oh, okay, I did let my team down. He did tell me, all the way around to, by the time you've got your 3rd week in reserves, it's like, I am never going to do that again. I take full responsibility. I let my team down. And it's controversial, but if you don't play team sport, you often don't know how to take responsibility for things. It's always a deflect or denial onto someone else, because you've never had a coach square you up and say, you're wrong, you were out of order, and you're dropped, or don't do it again. You're not part of the team. And that first time that you take responsibility for something, it's like a cathartic, life-changing moment where you've actually said it was me, because a lot of people wallow in mediocrity because they can never go through the reflection and learning and change and transformation that's required for growth, because you don't acknowledge any of the fundamentals. And playing sport at the highest level you can, the highest level you can means eventually you're going to get crushed at some stage as you move up the pathway. And we were talking earlier about those years where you only win 1 or 2 games and you lose 16. They're the great leaders. And I read something very interesting, just a tangent on leadership. I love how sport, there's different types of leaders. You've got your real quiet types, and you've got your Tony Robbins type motivators, your big orators, and you've got your quiet and different ones work in different times. And I really love that example of the Chilean miners. Do you remember when they were trapped underground?
Yeah.
I saw a leadership study on that where they said, for the first half while they were underground in the dark, it was the motivators that kept everyone going. Think of your dog at home and your wife and family. Those guys ran out of gas about a week. I think it was 2 weeks underground. I should know that. And then the quiet, pragmatic guys kind of stepped up into the breach. And the orator it wasn't about that now. It was about conserving oxygen and just making cold plans. We were beyond the cheerleader stage of the cycle. And I found that particularly fascinating, because that's like team sport. You'll have your opening batters whose job is not necessarily to score a wealth of runs, but to tire out their bowlers. And then the skilled players then come in and cash in, and everything performs as a team. And I just found that fascinating. And I just find the fact that there is no one magical leadership style. But I think the one common thread is storytelling. You must be able to articulate, where are we going? What is this journey? What's the champagne going to taste like on September 28? And even if you don't get there, it's the nobility of the quest that's so exciting. Because only 1 out of the 16 get there. 15, 16 fall, some fall early, some fall late. So that's the thing of sport. You are guaranteed to have the post-mortems, the self-reflection, the acceptance, the growth, I'm never doing that again. Because if you never do that mistake again, that's one mistake. At least the coach knows we're not going to make that blunder again. Because there's only so many blunders you can make, and then you've got a pretty watertight team.
There's a lot of knowledge there, mate. It's really interesting to reflect on some of the things you're talking about, and I guess it triggers me in our business, where we are dealing with talent, similar to yourself and what you're doing on the creative and the brand side and the multicultural side of things. For us, with talent, attracting talent in an industry that's increasingly difficult to find talent in logistics and supply chain, albeit that it's 25 to 30% of the economy. Most people don't realize. And a lot of that's now online. And that throws me into the whole online discussion. And a question I've got for you, with kids doing less sport, less outside, those are big statements, but if they're a third of their lives is spent on a device, and I've got to say I'm very much the same, and possibly you are as well, but if they're more time on a device and they're not outside kicking a footy around or throwing a basketball around or hitting a baseball or swimming while they're on their device, how's that going to play into the leadership stocks for any industry, let alone logistics and supply chain, which is not seen as a sexy part of the industrial world? How do you see this playing out? I mean, are we going to end up with this massive shortage we can't compensate for?
I think with the rise of AI, which is just anything that requires repetition is going to be done. That's the cold reality. So I think you're going to see a mass revival of the value of soft skills. I can't see it any other way. Storytelling being absolute one of those. AI can't give you a personal narrative. AI can't qualify and close someone in person. AI can't read body language. If you look at salespeople, AI can't predict what humans are going to do on cultural lines. There's certain things AI can't. It can have a good crack at it, but I think you're going to see the rise of the soft skills, and that's why sport's more important. If you have these mandated times, at least if you have your hour of training of soccer, an hour a game on the weekend, you're probably more, if you have something to do it for, you're probably going to ask a parent to go and have a kick. But if you don't have that end, everything should start from the end state being Saturday morning. Me and 6 other players are going to play against the guys on the other side of the town. And without that fixed piece to practice around, it just becomes random kick-arounds in the park, which generally, they sound romantic, but they're not sustainable without a greater prize, with so many things you can commit your time to. Because I remember being scolded for having my head in a book for too long when I was young. Get out. You just wouldn't hear that now from a parent. I think book reading becomes an absolute superpower, that you can go so deep into a topic for such extended periods. I've got all sorts of theories on. I've been reading a lot about the creative process and how the creative process and the engagement of the front brain, which has a much lower calculations per second, with this miraculous back brain and going. And so I've been actually putting some things into practice in my creativity. If I've got a problem to solve, I will park as much as I can in my brain, then I'll go for a swim. And because I've got a very unorthodox swimming style, which kind of isn't traditional, so I've got to focus on that and take my entire front brain on staying alive and making my 1,000 meters. By the time I get to the other end of it, the back brain has solved it. I think it was Einstein that said you cannot solve a problem at the same consciousness the problem was created. So you're just banging your head away on trying to solve this thing. You need to get into another, and that means disengaging the front brain from the problem and that's why all the great aha moments happen cycling, in the shower, running. Those big moments happen when you've dog walking, when you're really watching your dog. The great moments happen when you let the magic of the back part of your brain really just step into whatever the problem is.
Awesome. Yeah, as you're talking there, so many thoughts and feelings coming through about going through the whole process of exercise. And when I look back, especially when we were kids and what have you, and I know a lot of parents are very, very full on into making sure their kids get plenty of exercise these days, but it really does worry me, and I do see it coming through, especially in our coaching business, our executive coaching business, that there's the definite split between anybody sort of under the age of 40. We're getting some people who we're coaching are extremely good storytellers, so they're well read. They tend to, generally speaking, have a good exercise, sporting background, one thing and another. And others who are more perhaps academic, not quite as outgoing, have fantastic at their jobs, maybe in a senior executive role in logistics or supply chain in our case, but they can't articulate. They can't share the story. They can't engage enough people to be successful leaders. Therefore, we end up coaching them.
Well, what we're seeing now is that because of the rise of LinkedIn, you are now expected to be, if you happen to hold a CEO or a major leadership position, you're expected to be a thought leader in your industry, because you just can't rely on being a backroom dealer and a kind of manipulate them. Those middle management type skills, or someone in your company will become the storyteller and the thought leader, and people will say, "What's that guy doing there?" And because LinkedIn as one example is the most democratized, incredible thing that's ever happened to the world in many ways, where
sure is.
We find out that the mail boy is actually a genius and should be rocketed, and people can say everybody's got a platform. You got 500 words a day to say your thing. There's 1 billion people on there. It's the biggest B2B. For people that still think it's a recruiting site, what a comedy joke that is. If we only used it for the 2 months every 3 years we were looking for a job, the thing would sink like a tank. People are now
Exactly.
using it as their Rolodex. They're using it as now their personal platform to get messaging out there. Brands are doing it tough on there. Who wants to hear a brand? Why? Because we want to hear from a human. It's all personality-led content now. There's so much AI stuff out there. The only way we know anything is authentic or we can build trust is when I hear the humans say it. So future leaders are going to have to learn to get on camera. And I'm seeing a lot of podcast businesses now popping up where they're going into CEOs and saying, we're going to shoot one thing a week with you. You give us your piece of wisdom on this or some commentary on current affairs. So the public speaking, which was always a strong, now you need to understand the storytelling. And this is the whole thing about creative. We're all creatives. Every CEO, everybody's looking for solutions all day. Creative is not just put beer in a clear bottle. Creative is the constant solutions, whether it's finding the right human piece that's going to unlock the value, the creativity that CEOs have to go through. And the only way you can articulate your vision, because a brand without a story or a product without a story is just a commodity. A company without a story is a ghost ship. Why would a talented person in logistics? Because once you get to a certain level, people only move for the story. It's sometimes not even the money.
Absolutely.
They want to believe in the brand, where it's going. I'm a challenger brand. We are the number one. We want to retain that. We've got it. We've niched hard down to own our little thing here. We're all storytellers. We're all thought leaders once you get to a certain level. And you have to, these soft skills that we spoke about earlier are going to be extraordinarily. So storytelling is about to have the greatest renaissance, and you're all already seeing it. I'm seeing a lot more CEOs on LinkedIn starting to share stories. I'm like, thank God, the more it becomes a storytelling platform, the more people we're going to get on there, and the more it's going to separate from some of the horror stories going on the other platforms where anonymous people not linked to their, I love how it's linked to people's work. We get the best of people on LinkedIn, and that's all I'm interested in. I don't want to see people's dark, manipulative side. No, thank you. Life's too short. Give me people's greatest hits.
Out of every brain dump I'm getting from you, Patrick, there's about a half a dozen things that I really want to drill down on, but we've got an audience that really want to see some good output. So from me, and I guess one of the things that leads me is the fact that we see so much about podcasts these days. So I've got a quick question for you: is do you see podcasts sticking around? I mean, I'm addicted. I've got 4 or 5 podcasts I can't live without. Either very first in the morning, waking up, or going to bed at night. I always wake up maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and then podcasts are still playing in my ears. So for you, do you think podcasts are here to stay? And 2, name me 3 podcasts that you are committed to and addicted to.
A podcast, the US election just proved it. They're way more important than the mainstream media in conveying messages now, because they're seen to be more human. In the old days, the journalists used to be in news used to be working class, and there's this new elite professional class that are more commentators and are fueled by agendas, and so no one trusts mainstream media. Oh no, I don't trust Fox and whatever on one side. I don't trust CNN. I both know they're being driven by agendas, and what you get on a podcast is the humanity of someone directly, and that's why Rogan, on a good podcast, gets more than the entire US mainstream ecosystem when he has a Trump on or a big one. He gets more than the entire. So we've changed. It's going to go through rationalizations. It's going to go through a range of things. But I think people are now in this new era of citizen journalists, and we trust the people. So I think so. I listened to Pete David, PBT, for anybody who's interested in a daily news coverage, right across the board, a little bit right-leaning, but across the board. And while they were number 1 globally during the election, the night of the election, number 1 globally from a hangar in Florida. It's got a big following. And he had Candace Owens there. He had a lot of other people there, commentators, and CNN was number 52. And I think out of the news platforms during the US election. And of course, Fox, I think now is accountable for the top 40 news streams in cable news in the world. So I think it's here to stay. And as you say, it's news when you want it, how you want it. You can do your own interpretations of what you're getting, right, left, or centre.
But I think it's an enormous impact on business. And I think you're very spot on when you say that leaders these days need to be seen as subject matter experts and leaders in certain areas and need to understand exactly what's going on. We're seeing that happening when people are going for interviews. They're being asked about all sorts of random things to see if the employer can find if people are well read and understand the world around them.
I just think should be rewarded that people spend their time going deep on things. But I can absolutely say for authority that the old sort of bully CEO who is able just to surround himself with brilliant people and sort of manipulate them in a Game of Thrones style, I think they're done. But back to your question, 3
podcasts.
I'm a history buff, but the podcasts that I listen to every week are all comedians podcasts, because I think comedians have come into their own now as the court jesters, as the only one that can whisper the truth and the only one that can reach the other side in this incredibly polarized world that we're in. If it's wrapped in comedy, it's more digestible. I think I heard someone say that your ears are most open after you've just finished laughing, and we need comedians, and comedians were always on the left, as you know, where the left was always the working class. That was where free speech sat. And bizarrely enough, comedians now sit on this, what you would call the center or the center right, who seem to be where free speech lands. I find that so fascinating that in my lefetime, and the comedians on the left now seem sort of whingy and weird. And I just don't know what's gone on. And Rogan was once an absolute hard lefty. So I listened to Andrew Schultz. I think he's absolutely hilarious and brilliant, and he's got a podcast called Flagrant. I listened to Theo Von. I think Theo Von is just so unique. It's funny that myself and Barron Trump are listening to exactly the same podcast, because Theo Von, Flagrant, Rogan, and I love Chris D'Elia. His podcast is, I find him hilarious. He got cancelled and he's come back, and I think those guys that have been cancelled are super bulletproof, and they're the only ones I will put on and go and do. I'll go and do like walk for an hour or do. But Chris D'Elia's is called Congratulations, and that guy makes me laugh. And that's what I'm trying to do with my posts. All my posts are 99% positive, and the amount of people that, it just shows me there's a gap for positive stories. People are really beaten down by negativity, and sport just provides that. I mean, I remember the old saying, you know, Michael Jordan said Republicans buy sneakers too. It's the only bipartisan thing we have, and it's the only intergenerational thing we have where granddad and grandson can share the same thing. Everything else is time stamped as being their music or your music, or we used to eat that or this music, or the films of the old days. But sport is, you know, here. If you're a Collingwood fan, as a great granddad and great grandson can share the same things. Sport is, yes, it's clumsy at times, and people say it's just chasing a pigskin around, but we all know that it has evolved to be more than that. And I think it was Pope John Paul that said sport is the most, of the unimportant things, sport is the most important.
Brilliant.
Pope John Paul, love it. We get inspiration from everywhere.
Mate, we're getting it all. You're a poet and a prophet of what's going on out there. So much wisdom there, Patrick. Really appreciate it. Fantastic to talk to you. Just as a matter of interest, Theo Von, I'm all over him. So anything that's going on with Theo Von, she's not supposed to be so funny, but she is. Candace Owens, who's one of the biggest in the US. Dave Chappelle. At the end of the day, if I've had a hard day and we put up with all the bullshit of the day and I want to get a laugh, I'll just go back to a Dave Chappelle from 3 years ago and just listen to it, and he just cracks me up. But Andrew Schultz, I hear what you're saying, love it, and I think you're dead right. I think podcasts are here to stay. They're an enormous font of knowledge, and anybody who's not well read should be still reading books, should be listening to podcasts to expand the brain, get it out there, and while you're doing other things, you can still listen to a podcast.
What you're going to see is the rise of the curators. There's going to be so much of it that then the value comes on the guys that can come and break it down. You've got to listen to this episode, that episode, and then you can really get the best out of the organism, or it can just be overwhelming, or you just stick with your favorite. So that's really cool that you ask your guests, because people go on different journeys, but there's quality everywhere.
No doubt. Well, Patrick, I think we're going to need to catch up again. There's so much that we haven't talked about today that I know you'd have an enormous amount of input and point about. So I'm going to get back to you in due course this year. But in the meantime, Patrick Skene, storyteller, Chief Executive Officer, author, curious optimist. I love that. Wordsmith, multicultural marketeer, and talker of the meaning of sport. Really appreciate you spending some time with us. How do people get hold of you, Patrick?
Patrick Skene on LinkedIn is the best. Skene. That's where I live, and I'm so grateful for that positive environment. I've met thousands of great quality people on there, and I think it's humanity at its very best. It's most inclusive. If you're a female, that's the best and safest space to be, where you're going to be most respected. I think it's a miracle, and may it continue.
Yeah, Patrick, really appreciate the honesty and authenticity, especially in of the work that you do and what you share. And I highly recommend that anybody in the audience joins you and looks at some of the stuff you're putting up, if not all of it, up on LinkedIn. The algorithm will certainly point everybody there. And look forward to talking to you again, Patrick. All the best, and have a great evening in Sydney.
All right, my pleasure. Thanks for the chat, Kim.
Thanks, man.